Disclaimer: any opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the University of Louisville. Hey everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of the Pandemic Preparedness podcast. I'm Sheldon, and I'm here with some awesome fellow students, each bringing their own perspective to today's conversation. We're diving into a really important topic: how should hospital administrators prepare their organizations for the next pandemic?
So in this episode, we're kicking things off by reflecting on past pandemics, specifically the COVID-19 pandemic, and how hospital administrators handled the chaos that unfolded, what worked, what didn't, and how we can apply those lessons to the future.
And the big question we want to answer with this podcast is how can hospital administrators plan, strategize, and adapt to ensure that they're ready when the next pandemic hits? Because let's face it, we all know one will come eventually again, someday. The question is, are we ready for it?
Exactly. And to ground our conversations, we're going to be talking about some of the key principles of management, including the importance of reflection and evaluation. One name that always comes out when we talk about effective management is Peter Drucker. He's basically the godfather of modern management thinking.
Drucker's influence is massive. He emphasizes the things like understanding the environment, focusing on results, and making decisions based on data. In the context of a pandemic, those ideas are crucial. You need managers who can look at performance of their organization, assess what went well and what didn't, and make decisions accordingly to improve the next time around.
I definitely agree, and I think that one of the key things that we'll keep coming back to in the future episodes is how managers can learn from previous crises. I don't think we should just be talking about COVID here either. Think about how during the 1918 flu pandemic, how that impacted healthcare systems and what lessons that we can apply from that still apply today.
Right, and I agree. I believe that COVID-19 was a massive global event that stretched hospitals to their limits, exposing vulnerabilities in the system, but it also highlighted the resilience and innovation that came out of necessity. We saw some hospitals adapt incredibly quickly, shifting to telemedicine, finding new ways to manage patient care, and improvising supply chains.
And don't get me wrong, those are all good. But then again, we all saw some serious failures in some areas. One major issue was communication. Remember how confusing it was at the start of COVID? Hospitals had to make decisions with incomplete information. And then there was the issue of inconsistent leadership. Some hospitals were well prepared, but others had to scramble.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the major point. When it comes to managing during a crisis like a pandemic, leadership is critical. A lot of success stories were heard about during COVID came from strong, decisive leadership. Peter Drucker was a huge advocate for what he called management by objectives. Essentially, you have to set a clear goals, communicate them well, and then constantly evaluate whether you're on track to meet them.
I think the pandemic showed how important it is to have flexible, clear strategies. Like when the hospital set up field hospitals or restructured entire departments to focus on COVID patients. That is an example of managing by objectives in real time. But those strategies were only effective because they were based on constant evaluation and adaptability.
Yeah, and I think it's important to highlight that managers can't just keep reusing the same strategies without reflecting on what worked or what didn't work in the past. Hospitals, like any organization, need to be in a state of continuous learning. That was one of the biggest takeaways for me. How quickly managers adapted. But the question is, how can they prepare better for the next crisis?
It's all about proactive planning. We don't want to wait for the next crisis to force us to adapt. Managers need to create adaptable systems even when there's no immediate threat, like build stronger communication channels, securing stockpiles of essential supplies, and maybe even think about employees' well-being long before a pandemic hits.
Exactly. And if we're being honest, I think part of the issue in COVID was that so many administrators were focused on just getting through the moment. When the pandemic first hit, the focus was on survival, which made it hard to look ahead. So when we think about the future, I think it's important that we have contingency plans in place that aren't just reactive, but preventive.
And that ties into what Drucker said about managing by focusing on results. It's not just about reacting in the moment, it's about understanding the outcomes that matter and shaping strategies to ensure that outcomes happen. So, how do we see hospital administrations doing this in the future?
I think it starts with having a clear crisis management frameworks in place. For example, we need to think about how we manage supply chains when they disrupt or how we can transition resources when we don't have enough. It's a balance. It's a balance of anticipating problems and not getting bogged down by the chaos.
And that means managers need to be really good at looking at past strategies and assessing what worked and what didn't and being able to adapt from that. When we look at what happened with COVID-19, we can clearly see where the gaps were in communication failures, lack of planning for long-term care needs, and inconsistencies in data. But we can also see the strengths in these, things such as rapid innovation, flexibility, and the willingness to adapt.
That's a great point. And as we continue to explore this topic in future episodes, I think one thing we'll focus on is how managers can use those past lessons to create better strategies for the future. Because one thing for sure is pandemics are inevitable, but with the right preparation, we can handle them better for next time.
I couldn't agree more. It's all about learning from the past while still looking and thinking about the modern day. It's not just about predicting the future, but also being prepared for whatever may come.
And that's where we'll wrap up for today. We hope this episode gave you a good foundation of what hospital administration needs to learn from past pandemics like COVID-19 and how they can apply lessons moving forward.
Next episode, we'll begin to go more in depth as we talk about how one of the biggest ways to be prepared for a pandemic is building a strong work culture and environment.
Thank you so much for listening to the Pandemic Preparedness Podcast, and we'll catch you next time.